a lot of those queries are not things that you're going to rank for anymore because they're too high level. The AI is going to do better. Google will have an AIO for it. So you need something that is lower in the funnel. The biggest thing is that content strategy shift, especially in B2B SaaS. I think from there, my general view is that the search world is fracturing and that what AI has really done is cracked Google's monopoly. And what we're going to see is AI as a feature in everything. And that's a real different world. And you need to think about that differently.
You know that feeling when you're talking to somebody and you know instantly, wow, they know what the hell they're talking about. And this totally makes sense. That was my conversation with Mike Buckbee of Knowatoa, talking about AI SEO and how we all should be thinking about getting our brands recommended and mentioned to our potential customers in LLMs like ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude. Mike has some insights that I've never heard before, and I've been pretty deep down this rabbit hole for the last few months, and he blew my mind. Things that we should be thinking about, both from a website and brand perspective, but also from a distribution perspective. He totally flipped my kind of 80-20 rule of content and distribution on its head. I can't wait for you to check out this episode with Mike Buckbee of Knowatoa, talking about how to get our brands represented and mentioned in LLMs like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, so that you can get more customers on autopilot from inbound marketing. I hope you enjoy. I think I want to start by kind of talking about why you saw the need for this, right? Like, why does Knowatoa exist? What did you see kind of going on that you say, I need to build a tool for this?
Well, you and I are in very similar communities. So I think, also have a lot of SaaS co-founder friends. And it really started, it was almost as a joke, which is myself, I'm a co-founder, and a couple other people were talking about like, hey, let's just throw our company names in ChatGPT and see what comes up. And this was like, basically almost a year ago. And stuff was wrong, and stuff was weird and lots of issues. But also, I'm a developer, a lot of, developer co-founders. And it's hard to overstate just how much AI has taken over the developer space. And, if you think about this as different verticals, adopt, technologies at different rates, it has just been wildfire in the developer space. And it has had a massive impact on the types of Google searches people do, where so much of it has just disappeared. And, putting all that together, how we started was literally, I wrote a script that hit OpenAI's API and spit out a CSV. And then I put it into a Google Sheet. And, I sent it around to a few co-founder friends for the company we were running at the time. And then, a few of the friends. And everyone was sort of like, that's interesting, but doesn't really matter. And then a few people who had sent out post-purchase surveys, which is like, hey, just how'd you hear about us? Like just interested to know, how we can reach people better kind of stuff. They started getting, hey, I heard about you on ChatGPT. And so then all of those founders started coming back to me like, hey, Mike, can I get an update on the spreadsheet? And we saw that too. So in our own behavior, we just saw a really big shift. And I think a frustration with talking about SEO in general is that a lot of the terms are not really nailed down. And
what do you mean by that?
Sure. So, what is a query? Like there's a lot of people talking about like, oh, Google gets so many queries a day versus ChatGPT. And sort of implicit in that is we can ignore ChatGPT, or we can ignore these new things because the majority of everything is still happening on Google. But, if you really dig into it, what you find is like the number one query on Google is literally the word YouTube. That's not a query. I mean, that's a navigation. Like I'm trying to get to YouTube. I already know what I'm doing, and half or more of Google's queries are that. And that's
like
not
brand words like Gastos or
brand words. The SEO term is navigational search. That like I'm looking for Salesforce login. That is not a decision-making query. I'm not researching. I'm not doing anything like that. But that's sort of how it's taken in the mix of things. And so, it's just it's not exactly, apples to apples making these comparisons. And so there's a lot of that where, there's really only a small sliver of, research being done, which is like, hey, I have this problem. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to do this thing. And that is where I feel like the AI tools excel, which is like, hey, my website's being attacked. I don't know what to do. What are some tools for this? And it spits out, oh, there's intrusion detection, network monitoring, web application firewalls. Well, I'm having this issue. Well, here's the one that's probably best for you. Okay, great. What are my options in here? And then it spits out a couple. And, there's a whole like search buyer's journey that's happening in AI that is being removed from traditional search for a lot of search quality reasons. And, if people are making business decisions, they're turning to AI tools a lot more than they are Google. So,
I don't know if you listen to the Marketing Against the Grain podcast. It's from the folks at HubSpot. I listen to like 2 podcasts these days. One's a history podcast, and the other is this one, because all they talk about is like AI for marketing.
Yeah.
It's with AI, it has shifted quite a bit, and it's like that's kind of solidly where my kind of passion is these days. Is like, hey, this is as important as electricity, as Bezos says. Like, how can I make sure I'm on the right path here? And they had the kind of internal SEO person from HubSpot, which like that's a whole nother topic, talking about AI SEO a couple weeks ago. And like a lot of it is behavioral changes that folks are seeing is like, hey, I mean, I have our Google Search Console pulled up right now. Year over year, we are down 20%, 25% in just impressions, and like clicks is the same. So it's like, it's all going somewhere else. But we see.
You mentioned HubSpot. So, HubSpot, was really the leader, especially for like B2B SaaS, which is where my mind usually goes, in SEO and content for a long time. And they have, I think, done a great job at shifting over to sort of the new playbook and the new ways of thinking about this. And here's an example of sort of what they've done. They used to rank incredibly highly for the keyword resignation letter, which is I'm trying to leave a job. I want to try to not burn my bridges too much. I want to write this. And so my intent is I would like a couple paragraphs of text I can put my name on and my boss's name, email it. And, they ranked number 1 for that, millions of searches a month. And you landed on their page and they had the classic super SEO optimized thing of it, which is a lot more text than you actually needed to describe this. They had people talking about like, oh, here's an expert at, you need to be and saying the same thing 8 different ways to like a 3rd grader, because that's what they were trying to teach Google. And it still wasn't very helpful. And then you'd click on a page and then they had a progressive form for you to actually try to get the PDF template and stuff. And you'd go through all of that. And what happened was Google had an AI overview that was for resignation letter that would just pre-write one right there in the AI overview when you search for it. And then it had a tab at the bottom that was like, do you want to just launch this as a Google Doc or do you want to launch this into Gmail directly and we'll just send this? And that's a whole new SEO threat in that, one, there's no all the normal SEO tricks and competition. There's no content strategy that's going to beat that. There's no like, my title, my meta description should be tweaked a little. I need more internal links. No, you just need a different strategy. And to their credit, I think HubSpot has decided we're going with a different strategy. And so they're doing a lot more content that is no one could write but them, which is, hey, we're HubSpot. Here is how we approach these problems. Here is how we generate content that's useful to multiple people in our teams. It's a lot more branded. It's a lot more, a term I use a lot is face versus faceless content, which is, if you cannot say, like when you read the words, you cannot picture the face of the person who wrote it, it's probably going to be done by an AI better. And,
Yeah.
you need at least some of that perspective. And so I think that's a big change, which is away from these very high volume, low intent keywords. Cause, HubSpot, what do they really do for resignation letters? They're not a resignation letter service. They don't do anything with that, but it was just like vaguely professional work stuff. So, you're not going to fight over that. You're going to come down funnel. You want to really fight for the determination type of, searches about like who is the best in the category. I'm trying to solve this. What are some players in there? What are the right categories? And at Knowatoa, which is a service for tracking a lot of this stuff, we have seen some really dramatic changes in like ChatGPT. That if you look at the early versions of ChatGPT and you ask like, hey, what's the best email CRM service, which HubSpot would be in, you would originally get a list of like 10 companies. And now what you get is a list of, hey, here's this company, here's the key features, they are best for this category.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're seeing our customers that are having the most success do is reflect that back. And so, Castos say, hey, we are the best podcasting platform for X. Here's our key features. Here's what's going to happen. And because a lot of times those things are wrong, or they're the consensus of what the internet has decided that you're best for, even if that's not strategically where you want to go. And that's a little different thinking in terms of SEO. That's not a normal sort of SEO task. That's more like a product manager task kind of stuff. And we see a lot of that, which is that the traditional SEO metrics of like, I'm trying to get these high intent keywords. I'm going to write these posts. It's going to be this traffic stuff, and you can sort of outsource it. I think that becomes a lot harder. So,
And when you say, like, I think this is to the meat of like, what do we do with this? Like when you say we reflect that back, like the way I think about all of this is there are questions that people are asking, like actual questions, like what's the best CRM for a medium-sized business, or what's the best podcast host for WordPress? You want ChatGPT to know that you are the answer to that.
Yeah.
As opposed to what's the equivalent, like podcast hosting platform, like that's kind of the keyword we think we should rank for in Google. The things we would do to rank for each of those in Google or in ChatGPT are like quite different from a strategic like input perspective, right?
Well, I think yes and no. I think I used to be like an in-house SEO at a big cybersecurity company, and I worked with big agencies and did multi-language global SEO stuff for a long time. And the strategy, like come into Castos, you'd be like, okay, well, what are the things that are really leading into this? Like, because people don't just go like, I'm going to make a podcast, maybe it's something else like, that you have like stats pages around podcasts and those, lead into this, or, something that's not exactly looking for the service, but like, hey, here's our list of best microphones for podcasters, and a lot of those queries are not things that you're going to rank for anymore, because they're too high level. The AI is going to do better. Google will have an AIO for it. So you need something that, it is lower in the funnel. And, no one has an infinite marketing budget. We're all trying to get the best return for our dollar. And so you need to make a decision like, do I write the article that here's the best, microphones, or do I write something that says like, hey, Castos is unique in X, Y, and Z ways, and work on doing distribution for that. So I think the biggest thing is that content strategy shift, especially in B2B SaaS. And I think from there, my general view is that the search world is fracturing, and that what AI has really done is cracked Google's monopoly. And what we're going to see is AI is a feature in everything. And that's a real different world. And you need to think about that differently. So.
Yeah. Got it. So it's almost like a positioning manifesto type piece that you would publish. LLMs would kind of crawl and understand that to position you this way. The other thing that I think about is like, as you mentioned, like search is fracturing, the sources for ranking is changing too, right? Like used to be your website was like the most important thing. And like, fuck Reddit and Quora and all these places. Like, I don't really care. I want to optimize everything about my site. It's almost the opposite now, to where like,
So
Reddit probably is the most important place to get your brand. That's kind of what I would say.
In general, what you're describing is something we call siteless SEO, which is you just pretend your site doesn't exist. What are you doing in the world that's going to get you set? And, what really comes out of this is there was a technical SEO term, which was the duplicate content penalty, which is that for all stakes, you don't want to have the same content on your site that's on someone else's site because you sort of split the value of that. And in the AI world, the number one ranking factor that we found is repetition. You just want to take the same message and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And you need to be strategic about where you distribute that. So here's an example. So you mentioned Reddit, ChatGPT, OpenAI. Sam Altman used to be on the board of Reddit. They pay them $1 million a year for access, multiple millions of dollars a year for access to the Reddit data feed to train their systems. Same with Microsoft. OpenAI has a multi-billion-dollar relationship with Microsoft, so they get access to LinkedIn. It is 100% straightforward to say that they build off of those two data sources. So it makes total sense to rank in there. Anthropic, which is a different system, they make Claude. They're owned by Jeff Bezos. It's a different ecosystem. There's a massive lawsuit right now.
Whoa. Claude is owned by Jeff Bezos?
One of the major investors. So
wow, didn't know that. Okay.
One of the major investors. And I'll get to another thing that I think you'll think is interesting. But, they're essentially barred from training on Reddit data. There's a big lawsuit about they're kind of scraping it anyway. But, if you're trying to train into that, not so useful. So there's some very clear, lines about this. And there's also a lot of non-site, non-search scrapers out there that are pulling information off the web from your site. You should still have a site. You should still do your best for it. But that, it's very clear, like Googlebot scrapes my site. They're a search index. They're now going to have answers returned. People are going to click on it and come to my site. There's a massive service called Common Crawl, which is, a crawled version of the internet that anyone can download via BitTorrent. Is used as the basis of a lot of these systems because they've been around for a long time. And why wouldn't you use them? If you're Anthropic and you've been tasked with okay, go scrape the internet, the entire internet. So
that's a good starting point, at least, right?
Yeah. Why not start with 10 terabytes of Common Crawl data? But there's no search engine attached to that. But it's very important you're in there because almost everyone is saying oh yeah, we've used Common Crawl data. So, and there's a bunch of those that do the sort of specialty kind of work. So it's something we've started doing is helping sites test whether or not these bots like Common Crawl can get through, whether or not these other services can get through. And it's a real different world. Again, it's much more fractured. Instead of worrying about Googlebot, we actually have, I think, 24. We're going to launch another one today, 25 different bots that we check can access your site properly. So,
just to one last point on that topic, how important is this LLMs.txt file on your site? We have robots.txt, or just for folks who aren't familiar with it, maybe tell me, and because I'm sure I don't understand it properly, what it is and is it important?
Yeah, let's start with robots.txt. So robots.txt is this text file. You go to any site, you put /robots.txt on it. You can see it. It's publicly available. And it's really a polite asking, hey, the website's asking, hey, bots, come index the site. Don't index these pages. Definitely index these pages. And we have a search study that's going to be coming out soon that actually goes into here's the top 4,000 sites from a bunch of different countries and how they're excluding different bots. And we certainly find, massive differences in different areas. Reuters is a great one. Reuters is a news agency. They're very against AI. They're very against AIs doing anything with their site. And their robots.txt has a bunch of exclusions that say hey, GPT bot, ChatGPT, get out of here. LLMs.txt, I feel was the wish of an SEO who's like, I wish I could tell these LLMs like what to scrape and what to do. And we're going to reformat our data so it's really easy for them to do. But to date, no LLM producer trainer has actually said like, oh yeah, we love this LLMs.txt. We're going for it. That's what we use. Kind of weird. And
so what's your take on like, I'm a whatever small kind of medium-sized business. Do I do this? Is there a downside to it?
I don't think there's a downside, but I think it's at this point, it is very low on the list of activities I recommend. And in part, all of these services are, if you look at the actual behavior of them, they are aggressively scraping your site and the HTML of it right now. They are not concerned about taking that HTML and turning it into some text strings that they can do some work with. That's a trivially done thing that we have been able to do for 20 years without any issues. So the LLMs.txt doesn't seem to move the needle, is what I would say. Again, I don't think there's any harm in it, but I don't think it's vital. It would be my take. So
yeah, just for like a data point, we did it. There's a WordPress plugin that does it and gives you a really quite good one in like 2 seconds. And so I was the same way. I was like, probably not super important. We did it in like 2 minutes and it's fine. It's pretty good. Like it doesn't like, we didn't do the whole, like, I'm going to scrape the whole site and put it into ChatGPT and like, it just does it. And whatever the logic they have behind the scenes, like it is pretty decent.
I mean, it's sort of like a sitemap, it's sort of like a sitemap for an LLM. So here's something I would recommend instead for those couple minutes, like, which is you go to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever service you like, and you type in, hey, here's my company. Tell me about my company. Tell me about the strengths and weaknesses. Tell me about, common objections. And then check if you have written content that matches those on your site. Because, again, there's a shift in what SEO actually means. What we've found is that, and a customer told us this, which is they said ChatGPT is now our most popular and least well-trained representative. And people all day, every day are asking questions of ChatGPT that aren't really like SEO questions. They're just like, hey, they're basically like
brand
questions,
kinda, right?
Well, here's like, does Castos support video podcasts? Like,
yes. I'd be
does ChatGPT know that?
I'm gonna go ask. Yeah.
But it's these sort of questions, which are like qualifying questions that are very low volume. And, in other contexts, I talked a lot of B2B SaaS. The question's a lot more like, hey, is this SaaS, are they HIPAA compliant? Because if they're not, they're out of the running entirely for our procurement system. We're not even going to bother looking at them. And so you can imagine there's just an unending number of these questions for any business. Like, do you have, a location in California? Do you do XYZ and this other feature as well? And, getting that sort of general business knowledge to be plainly stated on your site and put in so it can be picked up, I think is... a positive of this is that I think that's good things to do anyway. Like, I think it's good to state more of those features plainly. And I think it's good to, prioritize that in a lot of your social media. We're talking about putting stuff on LinkedIn and Reddit to say like, hey, we do have a video feature. Here's how it works. Here's our thinking about it. Here's how we put it in. And that's good all around. And I think that takes some of the sting out of this, which is like, it's not this whole other new thing to do that, may or may not work. The behaviors and things you need to do as a marketer are a lot of the same sort of things. You just need to shift somewhat what you're doing in there. And, those are positives as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah. It is like almost a little more clear, right? Like, I don't have to try to futz with gaming the algorithm. I just like kind of say what I do, put it on the website, put it a couple different places, like you're saying, being really clear and explicit about it. Checking to see that actually is like recognized, and then probably just keep doing that more and more. I have a question about the kind of Ask ChatGPT, and then I want to tell you kind of how we're thinking about it and have you kind of shoot holes in it.
All right.
So I asked ChatGPT, does Casto support video podcast? It said yes. I use ChatGPT all the time. So my question is, how much of that response is just in my account? Because it knows everything about me.
So
if you asked, would it be different?
Potentially.
Okay.
So there is a memory feature, which is, the way I view it is from time to time, it's a summarized set of all the past questions that you've asked. And that's how a lot of the AI systems work now, because they have a limited, what's called a context window, which is just like how many past questions. So they actually do this technique of like summarizing your past stuff, trying to pull things out. And in ChatGPT, you can actually say like, hey, remember this for next time, forget this kind of stuff. So there is part of that. And, to be fair, there is a part of that happens with Google as well, which is that if you search for like, hey, what's in the McDonald's near me? And you do that in Virginia Beach versus Boston, you get a very different answer.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other pieces of this where we do already have personalized search results in a lot of ways. So having a separate system like Knowatoa that doesn't have a memory can be useful in some cases. But, for the most part, my personal take is that a lot of this is still pretty primitive compared to where it's going. Especially with like Google. Google has a ton of information about all of us because everyone uses Gmail and Docs and all these things.
Yeah.
And so, there's much more footprint to build a sort of persona around in order to return this stuff. So
I want to come back to that because like I want to kind of think ahead about like what AI, like a little bit more of like a macro level, like what's AI going to kind of do to us all? I want to talk about that because I really value your perspective on it. But to kind of take what we've talked about so far, and this could be like a 3-hour episode, but like take what we talked about so far and like have some action items for folks. I think first, like get what you do on your website, which like at Castos, I would say like we've done that. Like we have an enormous amount of content, I think, for like the size company we are, because SEO and content has been our main thing so far. Maybe make sure that's really clear to answer the questions that someone would ask in an LLM, not just for like keyword query based stuff for Google. So redoing some content and maybe making new content. Cool. I would think of that not as a blog post, but like as a page, because like that might not make sense in like a blog post, but like that should just be a page and interlinking and all that kind of good stuff. I would then basically do the same on Reddit and LinkedIn. I would probably spin each of those posts to be kind of slightly different format or whatever. Castos has its own subreddit, so I would just post most of it there. And then LinkedIn as like an article on the company page, because those are public. Is that kind of 80-20 of it?
I think the 20 of it is creating the content and maybe the 80 is the distribution,
cool.
Where, so much of this is, again, the repetition where you have a feature, you want to describe it, you want to put it on, the LinkedIn company page, you want to put it on your personal page, you want to have that described in a review. And it's not in like the structured data way, but in just like, oh, here's another way for us to talk about this. This is an interesting use someone had of it. And you're just going to repeat this message over and over again in lots and lots of different ways that I think, drive home, oh, we have this feature. It's good for these reasons. And that's a little different. I mean, it's sort of the equivalent of like we were talking about, the example everyone hates is the recipes with like, oh, I was a graduate student and made apple pies, for my dissertation. Yeah. Well, I mean, all of that is there for SEO. And in the same way, instead of that, I think, there's a LinkedIn post that's like, hey, this stuff is good for these reasons. And you're just trying to find twists and ways to say that over and over and over again. Which is a marketing thing, a repetition of these messages.
We did, YouTube as well, right? Like, got to be on YouTube, right? So maybe that's kind of the three horsemen is like LinkedIn, Reddit, and YouTube. Every piece of content should be in those three places in some kind of way.
Well, I mean, here's why it's tough and why I say search is fracturing. It's not generally considered to be a leader right now, but like Meta's AI system. So, Meta, owns WhatsApp. WhatsApp has literally a Meta AI button on the home screen now. A billion people use it. Do you know what it's saying about your company? Like, you don't think of WhatsApp as search.
Yeah.
And, even Instagram, like Instagram's product managers have come out and said, like, we are really rethinking search for Instagram, where it used to be, you search for tags, you search for items. We're to do a lot more like solution kind of searches, like broader kind of stuff. And people have been doing that for a long time anyway. Like, we were talking beforehand and said like, oh, like my wife and I went to Boston for our anniversary, closer to where you live. And, she didn't go to Google to look up stuff. She went to Instagram, like restaurants in Boston.
Yeah.
And those are commercial queries because we went and spent money there. And, there's a lot of that happening already. And this is what I'm talking about, like the fracturing of search is like AI enables this to search just to be a feature that's everywhere. And we're just going to see more and more and more of that. We had briefly mentioned Jeff Bezos and Anthropic and all of that. If you go to Amazon right now, there is a Rufus shopping assistant that's in there, which uses Anthropic Claude behind the scenes to the extent that if you go to it and you ask like, hey, can you write a Hello World application for me in Python? It will write a little one for you right there in the chatbot on Amazon's site. And then it will try to sell you like an intro to Python book. And, and so this is an interesting thing where like, maybe you don't care about Claude, but you're an e-commerce seller. You have a feed of stuff that's going all the way out to Amazon. And, where you used to be able to type, products into that search bar at the top of Amazon, now you can type in, hey, what's the best 10 for like cold weather conditions if I'm trying to do this stuff? And it will give you a reasonable answer. And you used to have to go to Google for that. And fracturing, seeing more search as a feature is just how I view all this stuff. So, it's a weird time because we're in this transition, but I just see more and more and more of that happening. So,
yeah. I lied earlier. I listened to three podcasts.
Okay.
But I just got turned on to this new one. It's called Unsolicited Feedback.
Okay.
It's the ex-HubSpot, Brian Balfour.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking in a recent episode about how it's maybe becoming slightly more clear, like the positioning of each of these tools, right? Like Claude, Anthropic, like for coding, ChatGPT, kind of a consumer-facing app, Gemini, really having interesting like context exposure to like how you work, and then Meta like for kind of social and commerce, and that like they are increasingly trying to like put their stake in the ground to get the context and the exposure to sources as like their defensibility kind of play, right? Because otherwise, like if you just assume, hey, look, we're all just going to crawl the internet, how is one going to differentiate from the other? But it's like the depth of context and exposure that they have that could be the defensibility that helps them win in a market.
Yeah.
I don't know. So that you agree?
I think everything you said is accurate and transient. I was how I would describe it, which is that, and Claude is really good for coding right now because they have a Claude Code CLI tool. Literally this week, yesterday, the day before, Google announced their Gemini CLI tool that does a real similar thing. OpenAI 2 weeks ago launched a similar thing. And, on the dev side, have certainly seen that these are very modular systems, that in the background, we're using Cursor to do development, which is a customized AI first, development environment. And it literally is a drop down. You say like, oh, well, I want to switch over and use Claude, 3.7 because it's pretty good. Oh, Gemini 2.5 Pro came out. I'm going to switch to that. And literally it's this drop down.
Switching cost.
Yeah, the switching cost is click. So, that's not a lot. I think where things are more interesting is maybe the underlying kind of stuff, which is, Anthropic, I think, has released, to my mind, one of the best pieces of research around like what sectors are really using AI and for what they're using it for. It is right now a lot of dev techie stuff, which, you can take for a grain of salt, that if you're doing, if you're selling dresses on, custom made dresses on Etsy, that's a whole other business that's not as impacted right now, but, it's moving towards it. And, the areas they found that are the most affected are dev, and then marketing, and then healthcare, and then, moving down the things. And there's a lot of use for not exactly like therapy kind of stuff, but as like a sounding board. And generationally, the younger you are, the more likely you're to do this. And I see people doing this, which is, I have a slightly awkward social thing. Like I knew someone and they were trying to figure out like, hey, we invited these people to, our thing. They did an RSVP. So they asked ChatGPT, like, hey, is it okay to send them a reminder? Is that like a socially acceptable thing to do? Like, and it's like, oh yeah, that's fine. And then like, all right, write me a polite, thing for this. And ChatGPT writes a polite thing. And then they get a response back. Then, oh, it's totally fine. And that's not a search query. That's not research, really. It's this sort of feedback loop. And I definitely see a lot of people I have a lot of like pharmacists in my family, for whatever reason, don't know how that happened, but they're often in a position where they need to politely tell someone they were very, very wrong about something, like, hey, you prescribed the wrong thing here. It could have killed this person if we didn't catch this. And they need to send that firmly, professionally, and in a non-anger way. And so they write it up as like, you're a moron. And then they send it to ChatGPT and like professionalize this. And it does. And then they use that. And to think that these systems that people are relying on for these very high stakes social things and advice, and then they aren't going to turn around and use the same system to be like, hey, what pair of running shoes should I buy this summer? It's a different situation. And I think we're just going to see more and more of that companionship and like aid. And it's just going to bleed together with what we think of right now as search, is this thing over there. It's just going to be part of it. So
yeah.
Here's a question, Craig. Have you used any of the deep research tools?
I use O3 and deep research all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I mean, those are very interesting to me. And in particular, like Google has a new AI mode, which is like a deep research light, which is, we're talking about different ways of thinking about things. That is very much, I have an AI. It is going to go out and look at 20 or 100 websites. It is going to read all those in real time, figure out based upon the memory that it has about me, what I'm trying to do, the goals I just gave it, evaluate each of those, and then give me like a summary report. And there's some very high stakes things in there for marketers. We mentioned the bots earlier, and Google now has a Google extended bot. And if you are blocking it because it's not the normal Google bot, and maybe you're using a WordPress security plugin, or you check the box from Cloudflare or something, if you're blocking that, you will not show up in those results because it's using that user agent to make all those requests.
Yeah.
And that's a whole new world of, no one is looking at the site, it's just bots. It's a site for bots at that point. And it's a little scary. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. In deep research, I do notice that the same few sites come up all the time. Or like within a question, it'll go and ping a site several times. So to your point, like I think it probably has limited breadth compared to some other things that we do. Okay, I want to ask, like, getting to the end of the kind of like how are each of these platforms and models, like where are they going? Like for us, like it's not too bold to say, like as a society, I want to say, like, where is this going? What are you worried about? And like, what do you think we're not thinking about? Like as like entrepreneurs and makers.
I think the biggest thing that's hard for me to still wrap my mind around is the sort of implicit understanding of what Google is and does. Because Google is still the behemoth in the space. And for 2 decades, there was sort of this implicit deal with the open web of like, we'll crawl your site and then that's fine. And we'll send traffic to it. And that has really changed, and I think Google looks at the AI tooling stuff as a chance to make the open web search look a lot more like their other search products, to look more like local search, which is a lot more pay to play, their e-commerce search, which is a lot more pay to play. And that, from a Google product manager's mind, they're losing a ton of revenue by just sending this traffic out for free. And they've been slowly, boiling the frog, to use an analogy for years. But this is the big change where, what we haven't seen in the AI search space yet is really direct advertising. Like there's been some brand stuff. You can get into some of the AI search stuff by doing like basically opening up like what platforms you'll let your Google ads be on. But there hasn't been like, we're going to bid $10 for every time someone asks what's the best brand of pet food for my husky,
Yeah.
Like that hasn't happened yet. And that's still a huge open question to me, like how much this could become pay to play in different systems. So
yeah. I'll add one thing to that, and then I'll add my answer to that question. Because it's funny, like hosting a podcast, I don't get to talk about what I think very much. I guess that's being a good host. I agree. I think everything will become pay to play as organic content is reduced to like the value of it is reduced because like it's so easy to create a shit ton of it that is really good, especially on the written side. So I think like written content reduced, like the value of it reduced immensely. Distribution, again, like you said, being the 80% of it, like just getting it in the right places. I think like organic social toast, like aside from YouTube, probably, if you consider YouTube a social channel, I think like you see it everywhere. X, LinkedIn, like reaches way down because the volume of shit is so high that they just have so much more stuff there that like your pretty good post just can't compete just on a volume perspective. So like that's my take. And I've heard other like pretty smart social people say that like it's just going to go to a pay to play if you for sure want distribution. I think the thing I worry about the most isn't like it's not that some vibe coder is going to build Castos in a weekend and we'll lose business because of that. It's not that podcasting is going to become irrelevant because I actually think we're pretty well positioned against this like artificial content surge. Podcasting and YouTube probably pretty resistant. The thing I worry about is like 30% unemployment.
Yeah.
I think it's as likely as not in the next year.
I have a different take, which is
cool.
So like, let's just take marketing SEO. There are a lot of people that are very concerned. But I think the fracturing of it makes there be a ton more work. Like SEOs think about this as like, oh, well, no, I don't need to do this because it's saying, but it's evolving. So, and, I've laid out in general how some of this stuff is evolving, but I do think there's a lot more to be done in just sort of making sure that the right message is out there on the right platforms in the right ways. And if you need to worry about 5 platforms instead of 1, that's just more work. And if you need to worry about like, oh, the repetition of this message in a meaningful, interesting way onto a bunch of social stuff, that's more work as well. And so I think that's maybe a template for how this gets distributed into lots of other areas. Because on the creation side, what I think AI does is the super form of like a grammar check or a spell check. Like we don't have as many copy editors, like, per person as we used to. But the average level rises. So if you need to stand out in business and do stuff, you still have to apply the human element to it. So I feel like the floor comes up, but I don't know if the ceiling does, if that makes any sense, that you still need to have, the the human orchestrating it, and that's really my take, which is that like it's considered the default that everything is going to be spelled right and the grammar is right in any document you write, because you can just throw the basically free tools at it, to get that. That's not like a special thing, like, yeah, it's going to be a coherent, vague piece of writing that's going to hit literally the average, but it's going to take a human to really tweak it, to make it different, to make it interesting, and to raise the level of it. So
I guess the question, like, to play devil's advocate there, is like, if we just admit that we're writing for LLMs now, like, does it have to be exceptional, or is the repetition and the distribution of it more important than a single piece being amazing? Like, does a single amazing piece, does it have more weight with an LLM rather than you saying a bunch of different times in a really structured way that machines can understand?
So here's an example. I'm trying to live this,
Yeah.
Part of the reason I said yes to this podcast is I think, I'm trying to build an audience that literally hears my voice, and that, I talk to people about this stuff. But one of the things we did was we created a really great piece of content earlier this year called the Pay Rank Report, which was started with a question of what is the impact of AI skills on SEO salaries? That was the starting place. And what I found by looking through, and so I used a bunch of AI tools for this, like deep research, a bunch of AI analysis, a bunch of AI dev stuff. And what I did was I pulled job listings directly from corporate websites, not from LinkedIn or Indeed, because that really pollutes the data.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was, on average, there's about a $15,000, which is about 15 to 20% rise in salaries if the job posting had AI skills on it. So if it was a SEO analyst and then an SEO analyst plus, some ChatGPT or do other stuff, that's worth $15,000 more to that company. And that was not exactly what I was expecting, but it's an interesting sort of situation. And I found that, and so that's where the study started. And then it sort of broke out to be like, oh, well, if you're an SEO, what are the other skills you need to learn? Like, should you add in video? Should you add in social? Should you add in email? And there's a different, boost or negative, for all of those. Video, for whatever reason, was actually quite negative. So I don't know what that was.
Okay. Yeah.
But, and, there's a lot of caveats in that data, like what is it a video person that knows a little SEO, or is it an SEO person that knows a little video? Like, those are two different things,
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's interesting to look through the data anyway. And, that's literally where it's at right now. So, and there was a trend to be less juniors, more senior people, more like orchestrators, conductor kind of people, more people doing lots of different skills and things. And, that's both sides of it. That, I don't know if it's fewer people making more money, more junior people, or those positions don't exist and people just jump in at a higher level because they can, because they're using,
Yeah, no, I mean, I think just at a macro level, I think I do see the middle disappearing probably. Companies, employees, people will be negatively affected and laid off and have to go kind of do whatever. And then some will be successful and kind of elevate. I don't know, it just seems like AI is driving the wedge pretty solidly. Yeah, interesting. So, okay, I want to wrap up. Folks who want to check out Knowatoa and kind of who would it be best for, and what should they look to do there?
We have a free offering. You go to knowatoa.com, you enter your website, it will tell you hey, here's the bots that you're blocking. You're not, that's just a great place to start. They can't reach your site. You're not going to be able, anything you write isn't going to be influenced by. So start there, and then you can check a few things in ChatGPT, and then we branch out to the other services and stuff. We also have this thing called the Biscuit Framework, which is not specific to us. It's just a more formal version of basically our talk today, which is, hey, here's how you should think about some of these things. Here's how we recommend shifting your content strategy. Here's some, different aspects of this that you should consider moving forward. That's free. There's not even a registration for it. It's just a giant blog post.
Awesome.
So please check those things out. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with people. They can also just email me, Mike at knowatoa.com. So
awesome. Awesome, buddy. I appreciate it. This is super helpful for me, and I'm sure it will be for everybody too. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. This was a delay. It was great catching up. So
awesome. Cheers, buddy.
Bye.